Hey, Andy.
Hey, Jed, how are you?
I'm doing great, doing great. We got the whole posse here.
Yeah, I brought some friends today to celebrate spring. How are things in Sacramento?
It's summer. It might as well be July here. It's just absolutely ridiculous. But we'll enjoy the sunshine and all that. Hope you're doing all right. Back east.
I am. I'm hoping to get out there this year. I want to see a baseball game at the historic home of the Oakland A's.
That's right. Well, want to do that, and I'm coming to Washington. We're going to do a recording together. In May. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, we're going to get a charter school in DC. I think that's going to be a great time. We're going to be with some of the educators there. It should be really fun.
And I'm packing up all my equipment to do our recording at the base of the Chinese wall in the Bob Marshall,
Yes.
This summer too. So we got all sorts of mischief we're working on here together.
But so today, a couple of just get some housekeeping out of the way. I'm joined by two fantastic colleagues. Mary Wells is a co-founder of Bellwether, leads a number of pieces of work there, but notably is doing a lot of work on our AI work, as well as a bunch of stuff on sort of innovative approaches in education more generally. And Marisa Mission, who is just a fantastic talent, as you will see, and is leading a lot of our AI work. And if you're following that work closely, you've probably seen her name on a number of our pieces of work and work products. And she's out and about. If you're in Virginia, she's going to be doing some work with principals here in Virginia this summer. You're going to see her around, and is really doing some of the best work, I think, in the sector around AI. And so we asked them to join just to have a conversation about AI and AI in education. Before we do that, and so our long-suffering producer, to try to give him a break, Jed, do you want to say what we're doing here?
Yeah, this is the Wonky Folk podcast. I'm Jed Wallace. My co-host here and partner in mischief is Andy Rotherham. And yes, we're reminded, if you do the likes and those kinds of things and the subscribes, it actually helps on viewership. So and reader and listeners. So please do that. But meanwhile, you mind if I get us started, Andy? I mean, I'm Mary. It's great to see you again. I mean, whatever. I've got longer history, I think, than Andy and I do. So yeah. Really looking forward to catching up. But Marisa, great to meet you. And also, I find your background intimidating to begin with. So, I mean, would you mind getting us started? But also, don't skip over where you come from, how deep you are on these issues. And also, I personally, would love it if you would just share, how are you personally using AI so that I might incorporate some of your smart ideas into my work habits and life habits, for that matter.
Happy to. Hi, everyone. I'm Marisa. I was born and raised in Las Vegas, actually. And so that's the answer to where I come from. And at the same time, I bounced around a lot. I did high school in Connecticut, college in California. Then I lived in DC for about 4 years. And now I'm currently based in Chicago. Came to Bellwether after originally starting my career in kind of nonprofit strategic advising. I realized that I just love education. I really want to be in education. And I really enjoyed a college internship I had at the U.S. Department of Education. And so that was where my policy journey began. And when this position at Bellwether and the team at Bellwether kind of welcomed me onto the team, I really jumped for it and really enjoyed all of the work since. I've kind of been mostly a generalist for a lot of the work at Bellwether, but in the last few years, I've specialized a lot more in AI in education. Andy's mentioned several of our publications that have gone out. Very excited to discuss some of the work that we've done there in the thought leadership. But we've also had a newsletter that I co-write with my colleague, Alex Spurrier. It's monthly, and it covers all of the updates, both across the AI, education, and regulation sectors. So check that out. And then finally, I am on a team internal to Bellwether, affectionately nicknamed the Skunkworks team. And what we do is redesign Bellwether's workflows and tooling to better fit our use of AI and integrate AI into our work and make sure that we're using it to its highest potential. So on that note, the latest things that I've been doing with AI is...
Wait. You skipped how are you using AI yourself? Come on, I'm ready to take notes here. Come on.
Yeah. No, I'm just about to get into that, I promise.
Okay.
There's two things that I have found very useful recently for myself.
Okay.
One of which is Claude Skills. And those are essentially packages of instructions and code that you can give to Claude and make sure that it runs essentially the same workflow over and over again. And you can run it on different pieces of information. So, for example, one that we are building right now is on work planning. That's a fairly rote routine thing. Lots of project managers out there know how to do this, right? And it takes some time. And so building out the first draft of a work plan is something that Claude can do within, I would say, 5 minutes max. And then our humans, our folks with the expertise, can adjust things as they go. So that's something that I'm really excited about, because I do think getting to the first draft and not staring at a blank page is a major win from AI. The second thing is a completely different model, Gemini, and its Canvas tool. And what it does is create slides that you can then export to Google Slides. And that's a major difference from a lot of other tools that supposedly create slides, but what they're actually creating is just pictures of slides. Whereas with the Gemini Canvas tool, it'll create slides, you export it to Google Slides, and they are like actual text and boxes and things that you can move around and change. So again, along the same line and theme of getting to the first draft more quickly, you can do so with both of those tools. And I think at Bellwether, we've been experimenting with a variety of things, but those are two that recently actually had some real value for me.
Wow, that's great. Thank you. I'm gonna lift both of those things.
I think the thing that's interesting there is when I talk to people, they ask, okay, like some people who are sort of really critical of AI and think it's being overhyped, they think like a big dunk will be like, Marisa said, like it can do the first draft and then you build on that. So there's always like a Bellwether, and I think most places are using it. I don't think we're unique. There's always a human in the loop, right? You don't send AI doesn't do something that then goes like straight out to a client. And people think that's a big dunk. They're like, well, you can't just have it do stuff and send it to a client. And that's true. But you know what else is true? You didn't have junior analysts doing stuff that then went straight out to a client anyway. There was always a human in the loop. And so I think like it's expediting some of these things, but it's not and changing it, but it's not completely sort of obviating some of these basic things. And I think like the often when people are talking about AI, we're losing sort of the counterfactual. And so people are like, well, it doesn't do this or can't do that. And it's like, well, what was that like before? What was the quality of that sort of at a median level? Before?
And one thing, Andy,
that gets lost a lot in these conversations.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing I would even add too is I've been kind of pushing on the definition or the concept of human in the loop. I don't think, and most people think about human in the loop as just a reviewing step. And to me, it's really not. I think human in the loop really means that you own the work still. You are, maybe this will rub some shoulders wrong, but like accountable for the work at the end of the day, right? Just because I used AI on a slide deck does not mean that I can brush off the responsibility of it being a good product. And so that, to me, that ownership still exists, whether you use AI, whether you don't use AI, and hopefully it just helps you get to your final product faster.
Can I ask you guys? I'm sorry, Mary.
Yeah, one more beat on this. I think Marissa's examples really show how fast AI is evolving as well. It was terrible at making slides just a couple of months ago. Claude Skills were pretty new a couple of months ago. And so all of the things that she's describing, if you haven't actually engaged with AI in the last couple of months, like in a substantive way, you have no idea what it's capable of at this point in time.
Is there a way that you guys is a general starting point that's evolving as Bellwether does its work? I mean, it's happened countless times. Hey, some new technology comes along. Hey, this is going to change everything. It gets overhyped, or people dismiss it. On the dismissing side, as it relates to AI, it's not just, it's not going to have no impact. It's actually going to be dooming in its impact, right? Is there something that you guys are migrating to generally? Is it bimodal here? Could be both things. Too early to tell. There are themes. Is there something, just a general starting point that
Well, before we get to that, I think let's push on the premise a little bit. I think this thing Mary just said, a lot of the conversations I hear they seem to be anchored in like 2023, 2024 models, or like the open source free stuff. Like the premium tools and just how fast this stuff is changing is really remarkable. And I think this year we're going to see a whole bunch of stuff come into the market that's gonna surprise people. And so I think like that's the first sort of like what actually are we talking about is, and then to your point, Jed, I think like you have to break out a little bit. Like you can think this is really remarkable and you can accept that it's going to do a whole bunch of new things and still be a doomer, or you can think that and be a real optimist. So that's almost like a separate question from the straight up capabilities question. But Mary, how do you want to, or Marisa, do you want to respond on the Bellwether piece?
I think we have a range of perspectives on this issue on our team, Jed, and I personally think that AI is going to have an enormous impact, and that it is both enormously powerful and might impact schools and our economy and our society to the good. But I also think that there's like really significant downsides, and it's really easy to use it in ways that do not promote learning and that create low quality slop across all parts of our society. So I think it's like the danger is how powerful it is. And we're still at a point where humans have to do a lot of work to shape it to be good, not like crappy or evil.
And go ahead, Marisa, please.
Yeah, and one thing I would add to that, Mary, especially in 2026, has been the advent, I say, of agentic AI. And for our listeners, I think a really key difference between the ChatGPTs, the Claude, the Gemini of the last, few years and agentic AI is it's as if you gave the AI hands almost. So if we think about 2022, 23, 24, those models as maybe just a brain in a jar, and you could talk to the brain and get some thoughts back, and that's the extent of the conversation. And it was fairly smart. For a lot of that, it could do things that a non-brain couldn't. How about that? But now it's as if we gave the brain hands. And those hands mean it can now take actions and do things on a computer, edit your files, create files, upload things, surf the internet. And that's, I think, what makes this moment in 2026 a lot different and much more powerful than we've been conceiving of the past few years. And it's worth paying more attention to this sort of existential question.
Right.
We want to talk about some of those existential questions and the macro effects potentially in the economy and even politics and all that. But before that, like just since we're on this thread, like I feel like there's one way to think about this is like as a 2x2. Is AI a novel technology, and will schools adopt it in a novel way? And I think you can believe, like, I'll show my cards. I believe it's a novel technology for some of the reasons you just described. Marisa, it's doing some things that technologies previously have not been able to do. I do think it has unique elements. Not everybody agrees, but I do think it has unique elements. I'm not sure that schools are going to adopt it in a unique way relative to how we've adopted other technologies, including ed tech, but also other, various other things. Where do you guys come down on that? And like with what are we seeing with schools? Like, is it, I think you both, think it's a novel technology. I don't want to speak for you, but we work together to have a sense of that. But where do you guys come down in terms of, are schools going to adopt it in a novel way or not?
I really like the concept of the ambidextrous adoption approach that Robin Lake has been writing about at SERPI, and think that we have to have schools adopt it in a not novel way at the same time as we support a small group of really innovative schools to adopt it in a very novel way. And that, like, I just don't think that we can have enough innovation at enough scale because of both how regulated education is, all of the privacy and safety requirements, but also just the large bureaucracy. I don't believe we can have a innovation at scale with this technology in the next couple years. But I do think we need to support districts and charters to adopt these technologies to take their work to the next level with efficiency and effectiveness improvements of 10%, 20%. Like, that would be outstanding and staggering if we could actually get that even within the same school structure that we have right now. And then, yeah, let's have a handful of folks or a couple of dozen folks running after these like really interesting, very different models that AI will enable. But I just don't think that that's going to be in the next like 2 to 4 years, because we don't have the human capacity to change.
Marisa, I want to hear your response. I'll just note for listeners, we will, Robin Lake, she has a newsletter, is putting out a lot of stuff, put out a really interesting paper based on a fellowship that I've been a part of with her. We'll put all that in the show notes, so you can find it along with some of the Bellwether stuff that Marisa talked about. Marisa, how would you respond to that?
I've got two main thoughts that are a little bit disconnected. The first is I do disagree that I don't think we'll see innovation in the next few years. I think we'll see it in pockets here and there. And, you know, what's coming up for me in some conversations recently has been folks who are overstretched, who like don't have a lot of resources, who are used to kind of getting scrappy with things, are probably going to be innovating much faster than we think they might be. I think the typical archetype is like, oh, because you don't have a lot of resources, you don't have the time or capacity to innovate. Whereas I've found, at least I think it rings true for me, it's been coming up in conversations that it is specifically because I do not have a lot of time on something that I am willing to figure out a way to do it better, to do it more efficiently. And so I think there may be pockets of really good innovation, and I'm not sure that we are ready. I do agree, Mary, that I'm not sure we are ready for that to scale across the whole country. And I think it's imperative that we find ways to do that. The other thing that I was thinking about is when we say schools adopting this technology in a novel way, there's so many different places that could go, right? I think most of us are thinking about instructional ways to adopt AI, but there is also so many things on the operational side, on the teacher preparation side, where AI could be a game changer for administrators for things like scheduling. If folks have read our Built for Learning case studies, one of our case studies was a platform that uses AI to help build the master schedule in ways that actually allow for a school's specific priorities. So, for example, if a school wants more time dedicated to special education or more time dedicated to professional development, optimizing, which is what AI and machine learning is really built for those priorities means they have more time for those priorities and they can better serve students because of it, even if it's not the sexiest thing in the world.
Well, I got 1,000 uses I'd love for AI as it relates to the operation of our schools. I mean, I'm in Sacramento here. I've got just stress from reading another article yesterday about Sacramento being $171 million in the hole. But the month before that, it was 43 million. And the month before that, it was 120 million. And before that, and I'm like, can AI just give me an answer here? Where do we stand? But leaving that aside for, a second, let me just ask, in terms of pockets of innovation, where they're going to come from. Now, I wrote something at CharterFolk in I think it was in January of 23. I was just back from a trip to India, and I had made a couple of stops to these tutoring centers that they have there. And India, it's sometimes called tuition nation. Yes, they've got public education, and it is probably as regulated and hidebound as the core of the American education is. But man, there was interesting stuff going on in those resource centers. And I was like, that's where we're going to see faster innovation and adoption. And of course, in the United States, in private schooling, in the education for the elite, there's not as much holding stuff back. So is that where we're going to see the innovation happen first, where there is less human constraint? I mean, humans are the bottleneck, as Tyler Cowen tells us over and over again, right? And if there may be some places where the human bottleneck is just not as strong, and that's where it's going to come from. But maybe there's another way to think about it. How are you guys thinking about it?
I think it's too.
Mary, what do you think? I think it would be the opposite of what you're talking about in some ways.
I think it's a really good question. And like if you buy into the Clay Christensen disruptive innovation model, you would say, yeah, this is going to come from states that have ESAs. It's going to come from micro schools. It's going to come from the homeschooling community. And I think that's where I land, in part because when I ask folks, like, what are you seeing that's really innovative? Most of the examples are private schools right now. And they're like new private schools, though. They're not the like stuffy, big branded private schools that cost like $80,000 to send your kid to, but they're like recently founded 5-6-year-old schools that are just thinking very, very differently. I do think even charter schools have like such strong regulatory boundaries that it's going to be hard for charters to innovate here as much as what I think you're talking about, and as much as like what we would all envision in terms of like really delivering education in a way that's like significantly different. So I think I come down to like, yes, it probably is going to come from the edge cases, and that mostly is going to be outside of public education. Not entirely, but I think mostly.
I tend to think that'll how it'll happen as an edge case, but and these ideas rarely travel. This is the whole problem in it. We've tried everything.
Yeah.
We've had lighthouse districts and all this stuff. Like
Yes.
and this has been the problem. I think though there's like a fundamental in education. The places you actually would want to innovate, and in a more rational system you would innovate, are places that are stable and running pretty well, not places that are like running these huge deficits and where they're struggling to staff their classrooms and all the rest. But in education, it's sort of the opposite, right? We tend to innovate in the most struggling places. And to use an example, like you think about like military aerospace, they test things in like incredibly pristine conditions in the desert, and then they work up to testing them in more operational conditions. And we're sort of the opposite. We go to like the least pristine conditions. We try stuff. And I think that leads to lots of false negatives. It's a problem. But the thing is, like, I think you're going to see like affluent kids, and you're starting to see there's some private schools now, they're going to double down on, we're not doing screens. We're not doing tech. We're reading books. And so I worry, just as like what we used to in more quaint times call equity, I worry about it from like an equity perspective in terms of you will end up seeing a lot of experimentation and a lot of screen stuff and all this with in more lower income communities and in districts that are more struggling. And I think that raises in terms of like quality of education, and then also what do you think people actually need to be prepared for the world that they're going into? I think that raises some pretty profound questions.
I think in specifically also because it's so easy to make product design choices that allow kids to kind of offload some of the heavy work around learning, and not that folks are purposely designing these products to be too like easy necessarily, but I think they're like, when you talk to the ed tech folks that are really working on this problem in a very high quality way, the number of very small design decisions around like how much to push kids, when to like let them struggle, when to like come in and help support them, like those are very nuanced decisions. And I think it's going to be really easy for perhaps the majority of tools to get it a little bit wrong, which will allow the tools, both teacher-facing tools and student-facing tools, to take more of the work off the student or the teacher than they should. And what that'll just result in is like, we'll find years later that kids have not actually really learned what we thought they learned because they haven't retained it. They haven't done that really hard work that is required to learn.
Mary, just double click on that, and we'll throw in the show notes. Dan Meyer, who's somebody else who's good to follow on this, he has a great piece this week on or this recently on math with this some math tools. Double click though when you talk about cognitive offloading. like just double click on like what you're referring to in practice in terms of learning, and you sort of got into it, but just really quickly, like, why is that something we need to pay attention to?
I actually think Marisa would be better to answer this. She's the author, the lead author on our publication called Productive Struggle.
You're literally demonstrating cognitive offloading. Right? Okay, Marisa, answer that question.
Well, it's very demonstrated. No, cognitive offloading, when we think about it in at least this context, is really about students. I think some would say cheating and giving AI their work, having it do the work for them. And then, as Mary said, they're not learning the things that we want them to learn, whether those are skills, content areas, or other things. And what Bellwether did when we were thinking about this is actually look backwards to learning science and cognitive science. And one thing I found that really fascinated me was that cognitive science as a field arose during the Cold War, as a result of the Cold War, because a new technology came about that had the power to make or break the world. And we needed talent in the US who could keep up with that. And all of that sounds very familiar to me. I don't know about y'all. And so I think we learned some really great things about what exactly learning is and how EdTech and specifically AI can actually boost different components of learning so that we are making sure that the tools are not allowing kids to just offload the hard work to technology, and instead they're using the technology to boost things like their memory, to boost things like motivation, but not just in the like fun way, but in the growth mindset way, to boost things like metacognition. One thing that I've been reflecting on a lot with some colleagues is how much using AI makes you reflect on your process of like how you do things and how to teach an AI to do something similar. And that's going to be really important for kids moving forward.
Marisa, let's steelman this for a second though, because if we had somebody on the show who was an adherent of the hardcore skills approach, they would say, you don't need this stuff. Like the fact that AI can do this for you, that's the promise. That's the world we're moving into, and we should like embrace that. And so this like cognitive, like this idea that you need to learn knowledge or mere facts and this stuff, we need to move past that. How do you respond in terms of like people who say the cognitive offloading, that's actually not something we should be worried about? That's the promise.
I would say that we can't, like, just because technology is making some things easier for us does not mean that we should just let it go and do everything for us. There's a lot of high stakes situations out there. If we think about kids being tested for disabilities, or I think the favorite currently of the news journalists is like nukes and being able to, and domestic surveillance and all of this. These are very high stakes situations, consequential decision making that we do not want AI making for us because it would affect our lives. And if humans are going to be the ones still making those decisions, they need to be prepared to make those decisions. And what do they need to be able to be in that position is content knowledge still, and is the skills of being able to think metacognitively, to think critically. And folks will still get that through school. They have to. You don't just like come out of the womb ready to think critically about history and patterns repeating themselves, right? And so I would say just because technology is making something easier does not mean that like what we're learning is moot. In fact, it actually makes it more important because there are more consequences on the line.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to get through Remembrance of Things Past this year. It's one of my 2,500 page goals. It's been there for a long time. I can tell you, I understand. I'm enjoying that book so much more with the best book club I've ever had. ChatGPT, every single chapter. It's incredible. I'm learning so much more, right? So it's clear the potential is there, and we see it in our own lives, but we also see this, just going slack. I asked Chat last night to look at my post from India, and what did I get right? What did I get wrong? And the number one thing it went to is you got wrong about how fast the adoption was going to be. And it cited some statistic, like almost 90% of kids are using Chat for their homework already. It's just happening so fast. And also cited interesting stuff like Columbia University really going bimodal in their guidance to professors about how people should be using AI in their classrooms, and being specific in their assignments. Some should be ones where the kids are actually, actively encouraged. Use it as much as you possibly can. And then also a lot of classes going back to blue books and handwriting and absolute separation from any kind of technology to be able to assess what the kids are actually getting. Is that kind of bimodalness going to be a part of the K-12 experience too? Are you already seeing indications of that? Or what are your thoughts there?
I think it is going to be. The other aspect of it, Jed, will probably be like learning demonstrations embedded in AI products. So that's a way to kind of like merge them together. If you can like come up with a product where through the use of the product, you're forcing kids to show what they learned. So that, I think, is one of the real promises of AI, is you could do much more embedded assessment and much more sophisticated assessment. But right now we're starting to see that sort of bimodal approach in schools. Marisa and I were just at a school called Dream Charter School in New York this week. And they have an AI readiness curriculum that they're rolling out with their 9th graders, where they're teaching the students to look at what the AI spits back on a particular question with some critical thinking and rigor, and say, like, do I accept this response? Would I edit this response? Or do I reject this response? And in order to be able to do that, you need to actually have content knowledge. Like, the people who say we don't need content knowledge, like, my pushback is like, how can you think critically about what the robots are feeding us on any topic at all if you don't like have deep content knowledge? I engage with the output on like education related topics much differently than if I just ask it a question on something I don't know anything about, and like have lots of criticisms when it's related to an area that I know a lot about. And then when I don't know a lot about it, I'm like, oh, this sounds great. I wonder what that is.
Yeah.
I do think that bimodal approach you mentioned, Jet, is actually like imperative. It's essential. I think students being able to switch, to know how to use something and to know when not to use a tool is so critical and essential, because there will be, again, as I mentioned, consequential areas of decision making where you should not use a tool like that. And then there will be times where like it is not worth the time and effort it takes to do something like manual data entry when you have a tool that can do it for you, right? And so I really think that's important. And Mary and I were on the exact same page. I was thinking the exact same school site visit that we had earlier this week. Something that really struck me was that in the lesson Mary discussed, the teacher was using pen and paper to work with the kids. They were thinking about AI and an AI response and AI literacy using pen and paper, and students were writing down, would I accept, revise, reject? Why would I do that? And so I think there is something really worth keeping the traditional ways of blue books and writing, and helping kids work through the tough part of thinking about something. At the same time, we're helping them understand, like, AI is good for this. It's not good for this. It's good at this sometimes and bad at this other times. And so to me, that bimodal is really, really important, and definitely a way forward.
But a huge gap is obviously supporting teachers, right? Like, we talk to teachers, the lack of, and I worry with these edge cases, these schools that are doing interesting things, this is not the median. And even in like large, well-resourced school districts, teachers are complaining a great deal about, like, they're not getting any support on this. They're not getting any training, even if the district has adopted a solution or multiple solutions. And so it's a place that seems like there could be a lot of common cause in terms of investing in training and support for teachers, again, because this is happening so quickly. But instead of something I noticed is, the AFT and the American Federation of Teachers, the large national teachers union, and Moms for Liberty, the conservative parent activist group. They've found common cause, which I guess is nice, peace in the valley, but it's around just limiting and getting rid of screens.
No screens.
Instead of like PD, how do you help teachers start to figure out how to navigate this world that we're moving into? That struck me as an interesting juxtaposition, kind of where we are, because you'd like to see more sort of ardent demands in state capitals for PD.
Yeah, I think there's a big gap in terms of bringing not just educators, but also families along. And that partnership is really it's like a perfect example of that. I think there is so much that is advancing in AI, like every other day, every other week, that I understand how it might feel overwhelming to try and bring your teachers up to speed, to try and bring families up to speed. Family engagement is hard enough. And it is so, so critical. I think that folks understand exactly what's at stake, exactly what's on the line for your kids who might be in elementary school and for whom it might seem like, why do they need to know about AI? They're like 10, right? But in 20 years from now, when they're 30, it will be everywhere. And they will need to know what that looks like and how to engage with it smartly. And so it's critical, I think, that that family engagement and that educator engagement comes alongside the student AI literacy.
Yeah.
So how do we address that though? Because like one of the interesting things is, and we can throw in the some public opinion stuff in the show notes, like there's just a lot of suspicion. And one of like you mentioned earlier, Marisa, some of these ways teachers can use this to become more efficient as an executive assistant and so forth. But some of the most like promising use cases, parents are like deeply suspicious of. And if you Gallup, I think it was, polled parents, and they were like, if you're using it for any kind of grading or anything, that's like, you're cheating at your job. You're not doing your job as a teacher. Whereas like that's some of the most promising stuff, right? And in my view, like I think like you said earlier, Marisa, rather than some of the student-facing stuff, these sort of operational and supporting teachers. So how do we bring, and then there's also Blue Rose, the Democratic polling firm, just put out just a really fascinating set of public opinion data on just how distrustful and suspicious people are. How do we bridge that gap culturally with parents in a relatively short period of time? How do we do that?
I think it's going to come down to really knowing your community and really addressing what is most salient and most concerning to them. One thing I have heard in some recent conversations with parent advocates is that certain demographics of parents aren't actually all that worried about the use of AI because they see the writing on the wall. They want their kids, especially if they are low income, they want their kids to have the advantage, to get out there and to be able to take advantage of this wave that's coming and to be at the front of the revolution, if it were. Whereas other parents, like you mentioned, really see that as grading as something high stakes for them, right? As if you remember it being a kid, like getting a test back was like anxiety inducing, right? It feels very high stakes for them, even though for a lot of educators, it's like, my like 90th test I've graded today, right? And so really being able to connect with parents on the things that matter to them, and then educate them and share with them and be transparent about why it's important that we use AI to make something more efficient. Does it mean that if an AI is helping me grade, your kid is getting better feedback that then is helping them progress faster? Let's tell parents that, right? Like, let's not just tell them, oh, AI is grading my papers. Let's tell them like AI is doing the first pass. And as a result, I get to engage much more deeply and I get to track your kid's progress better. And I think really getting at that is the heart of what engagement and education should look like with parents.
I think that the parent empowerment piece of this is just a fascinating one to think through. And it just seems as though it is a fundamentally different time now. Hey, if you're not getting something through your school that you want for your child, there are other ways for you to get it directly. And there'll be all sorts of interesting things that flow from that. I'd love to dive into that. But before we get to that, just I'm thinking of my 7 years in the classroom, mom and dad, teachers and principal. I just from the practitioner point of view here, what does this mean for, let's focus on teachers. Maybe we get to principals later, but like, how is the role of teaching going to evolve? Let's assume there is wide adoption. Let's assume it's kind of everywhere. And let's assume also that, AI is a great teacher. It's a great teacher. I mean, I come from a family of psychologists. My wife's a psychologist. They don't want to hear it, but like chat's already a better psychologist than a lot of other psychologists, right? And there are going to be a lot of teachers that are better, AI teachers that are better than a lot of human teachers. And yet there's going to be the very, very best teacher being a human one, right? So it seems to raise the expectation on everybody.
Yes.
Very complicated. Are you guys picking up themes here yet?
Mary, go for it. I know we talked about this recently, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I think we already see a lot of the planning related functions that a teacher fills being done pretty handily by AI. So lesson planning, customization, data analysis, and reteach planning. So all of that, I think, helps really diminish the amount of time that a teacher needs to spend on some of these things that are not like kid facing in a way that can be really good. But can is kind of the operative word there, where I think that a lot of the tools are built, like there's a lot of folks that build their own tools and you just don't know what the quality is going to be when you're basically throwing your student data into your LLM and you've got a prompt that you've done. And so like everything, like all of the, you know, outcomes come down to like how high quality is the implementation. And I think AI, both the tools that we buy and put in front of teachers and that they build, are going to have a huge range of quality. Everything from just like hordes of lesson planning slop that just is like taking what teachers have been doing for the last couple decades on Pinterest and moving it into Claude or ChatGPT, and you get kind of similar like range of outcomes, hopefully better, but like it takes a lot less time, which is great. And so I think there's a version of the world where teachers are able to really focus in on the relationship building, the actual instruction, and that the role doesn't change that much. I think that's probably true in the near term for the vast majority of teachers while we're going through this transition. And then I think there are like very different ways that the role could evolve in these schools that really go deep on innovation, where the teacher is much more doing facilitation of project-based learning, or where her classroom might have all 4 high school science grades in it, and the content is being presented by AI, and the teacher is doing problem solving with kids, helping them get over challenges, motivating kids, etc. I think those are both like very likely archetypes, and I'm sure there's like 7 more that will spring up in the next like 12 to 24 months.
Other thoughts about how teaching role is evolving here?
There's a couple things that popped up for me, Jed. One is, which I think, to your point about AI, is pretty good. It passes the sniff tests on a lot of fields, like psychology, for example. I think that doesn't make it an expert. And I mean, we've also seen like it's a terrible therapist, right? And so it might be spiky in what it is good at, what it is not good at. When it comes to teaching something, it might create a lesson plan that at first glance passes the sniff test. And for an educator who is stretched on capacity, just needs something for tomorrow, it might seem good enough. But if we don't have the capability to evaluate that and really test it against what we know for a fact already is high quality, then we are going to get very variable. Again, it's going to be spiky in what the outcomes are going to be. And I think one thing that is coming up for me in this conversation is the need for, and I'm putting my researcher nerd hat on, is the need for evaluation. And when I say that, I mean two different things. One is like evaluation of the performance of the AI. Is it doing what I want it to do in terms of creating a lesson plan that reteaches the content using, you know, XYZ guidelines, using my style, using our curriculum, and hopefully it's a high quality curriculum. And that's one, I think, set of evaluations that you can set up immediately, right? Like it should be more than just a sniff test that we're making these AIs go under. The second thing is our more traditional impact evaluation. So even if it manages to do all of the things that we think would make a good output or a good lesson plan, is that still impacting student outcomes the way we want it to? And in that middle ground, it might be where some of that implementation comes into play, right? If a teacher is not using it properly, ends up deviating from the lesson plan anyways, and ends up with unintended student outcomes, then we have more information really about what the AI is doing well versus the teacher role, right? And so I honestly can't say how I imagine the teacher role shifting. I think there is a lot that we can try and should try, but I don't know for sure what that will look like. But I also know that we won't ever know what that will look like if we don't look at it and measure it and think metacognitively about it.
Andy, thinking about it from a statewide perspective, you're on the school, the state board in Virginia. I mean, how is this going to affect the role of teaching?
I think I'm interested in a couple of factors. I think like the labor issues, and I think is going to be acute. I think the more general issue, like we haven't even touched on here, like what is this going to mean, like in terms of jobs, potential economic dislocation, and what's that going to look like? What's the more general effect on the economy going to be? I don't think it's by coincidence the biggest debate here in Virginia right now, outside of like redistricting, but like the biggest like actual policy debate is about data centers, which the state's been very welcoming to and has been a leader. And now there's some pushback on that. And are data centers, is this a thing for the economy of the future? Is it a bad idea? That's being debated. So I think it's issues like that. Like no one's really, I would argue we're not unusual on this. We're behind in terms of supporting teachers on this. Like I said earlier, Marisa's going to come into the state and do some stuff with principals here, and I'm really excited about that because I think we've got some catching up to do. And I'm excited that the principals are hungry for that kind of PD and learning. So I think everyone's a little bit behind. I'm interested in, and Mary, you and I have talked about this, like, what do we think is going to happen 12, 18, 24 months in terms of like the economic impact of this more generally, which schools are going to be downstream of?
Yeah, I think that anyone who has a really self-assured answer to that question is probably fooling themselves. I think there are a lot of good arguments on both sides of the kind of white collar job apocalypse question. I've been in rooms where it's a bunch of folks who spend a lot of time talking to other education leaders and Silicon Valley types that are totally convinced that white collar work is going to collapse in the next couple of years. I'm not so sure, given, I spend a lot more time talking to small business owners, blue collar workers, business people who like move stuff and make stuff in the physical world. And I think that AI is going to take a lot longer to work through those organizations than it's going to take to work through coding organizations, financial services, the like parts of the economy that are like very, very white collar focused. I also think half of the jobs in this country are in small businesses, and small businesses stand to gain like so much productivity and therefore like economic upside. Like my mom and my brother run a small winery and a farm, and they have like 2 or 3 people who are all doing like little bits of white collar work. They're not going to let one of those folks go. They're all going to be able, well, not my mom, but the others are going to be able to like really cover more ground and be much more productive. And so I think for these small businesses, AI has a ton of upside and not a lot of job downside. And that in itself is like half of the economy. I'm also a big believer in Schumpeter and the creative destruction. And yeah, I do think that there will be some destruction and it may precede some of the creation. But right now, what we're seeing is like, honestly, not a lot of destruction of jobs that you can definitively point to AI, and quite a bit of creation of new organizations. The scale that you have to work at in order to found a new organization is that's what's collapsing. You can be an individual and have AI help you with all of the paperwork filings. You can have ChatGPT be your thought partner. You don't need to have this long process and lots of money to start a company. So I think there's a real opportunity for entrepreneurship to blossom, even while a lot of the destruction does come to some of the white collar jobs. So I guess I land in a place of like, I don't know which way it's going to go, but I'm not ready to endorse any big like governmental programs to address the giant job loss that some people imagine will happen, because whatever we design right now, given how poor the information is about what's actually going to happen, like it's not going to be well designed. And I don't want to sign up for like UBI or a giant like government jobs program right now and then come to think of it like in 18 months it was like the wrong thing to do, but now it's another entitlement that we're, you know, straddled with forever.
I think
there seems to be some disagreement. I mean, like, Marisa, why don't you talk a little bit about, so the administration just it has released a new AI policy framework, and they and this keeps getting updated, and they released one during the first Trump administration, the Biden people, and there's actually, I think, on a lot of the stuff outside of like this issue of whether states should be able to regulate, on a lot of the piece of AI, there's actually a fair amount of continuity between the administrations. It's not like the dogfight that people might think. Talk a little about how you see that, the new framework, and just like, it seems like the states are in different places on some of the questions Mary raised on sort of how much to regulate, who should regulate, how to respond.
Yes, the framework the White House released is fairly continuous with what it has previous released in the executive order and its, you know, loud policy stances. And so I think on that front, it is fairly clear where the White House, at least, is willing to regulate and willing to step in, and where it's most definitely not. There's very specific carve-outs on things like child safety and procurement that states honestly can move forward on and should be moving forward on. But to your point, Andy, a lot of states, from my vantage, specifically in education, I should say, this might not be true in other sectors, but a lot of states are not necessarily moving forward on. At most, a lot of what has come up in state houses is around AI companions, deep fakes, and some of, like, you know, the worst case scenarios, which is not wrong. Folks absolutely do need to be focusing on those sorts of things. But when it comes to procurement, and specifically with ed tech, that I think is where we need to be looking forward. And when we think about how this connects to workforce, something that the Department of Labor released was an AI literacy framework that really focuses on some of what folks might call durable skills. So that critical thinking, media literacy, stuff like that. And that's where I think actually governments should really take a role. I agree with Mary that, you know, we're not going to see the massive disruption that I think maybe Dario Amodei started, the CEO of Anthropic, saying that, like, you know, white collar jobs are going to disappear. I think more recent research, granted, coming from a lot of the big management consulting companies, so take with that what you will, but a lot of the more recent research is showing that the job disruptions, the layoffs that are happening, are not necessarily the result of AI. They are much more closely related to other factors, whereas jobs that are highly exposed to AI are evolving, and the staff there are evolving, and new jobs are opening up with a demand for talent that is specific to AI. And so I think we're seeing more of a shift than a true, like, cliff. And what that means is folks really need upskilling. And we should look at companies and firms to be doing some of that. But I think it is also part of the government's role, maybe not to do as much on the UBI front, but to do a lot more on the upskilling front and making sure that folks are prepared for this new future that we have in front of us in time for it to come.
I think your guys' cautions against excessive confidence in our predictions is a great thing. I mean, who knows? Who the heck knows? It does seem to me, though, in terms of just broad themes, the way things are evolving, for the teaching profession, I think it's a recognition of, hey, there's a new capability that's emerging that can take care of a lot of what teaching used to be. But there is a piece of teaching that it probably can't do, especially this thing around motivation, around sparking curiosity about, and it seems to me as though the teaching profession, the success of it, the size of it going forward will be a function of the fact is, can teachers continue to make a unique value add contribution? And I think in many ways, the way we've set up the teaching profession so far deadens our teachers in the exact same place that they need to be most, enlivened. So that's one thing. A second theme that occurs to me is I just believe that the centrality of school, people coming to church to access the priest, that's going to be seen as a Middle Ages, phenomenon. You're going to be able to get not necessarily the priest, but something very priest-like almost anywhere in society. And as a parent, do I want my child to be in some other social setting? Do I want them closer to me? What are going to be the new social circles that we create for our young people if school is not quite as centric? It just seems to me as though that is the direction, a much more dispersed educational landscape than what we have right now. And it's in these broad themes that I, encourage CharterFolk to be trying to be as proactive as possible while remaining modest about how much we can really foresee the future.
One person I want to call out is Julia Freeland Fisher with Christensen. Mary mentioned them earlier. She's doing a lot of work on these relationship questions. I think I don't necessarily disagree with the vision you laid out, but I think there's also some problematic questions there about sort of human relationships, young people learning those things. And so I think I recommend her work. We'll throw it in the show notes. I think there's a lot of questions there that people aren't necessarily really thinking about that we need to. And some interesting institutions are, like you mentioned, priests. Actually, the Catholic Church, the last two popes have had a fair amount to say about this, particularly the current pope, and who has an AI advisor, and they're weighing in on this. The other piece, I totally agree with you, Chad. I think we're underselling this to teachers. Some of the things that teachers complain about the most, like special education teachers, paperwork, and the paperwork burden is enormous. And it's why a lot of special ed teachers, they leave special ed teaching. They don't leave teaching. They like working with young people. They like those aspects of the job. They're just sick of the paperwork. Like the use cases there are just phenomenal. And I think and that's another one of these with the counterfactual. People are like, oh, it won't, an IEP, if an AI agent is doing it, it won't be, as individualized and customized. It's like, have you seen an IEP? Do you see what these things what the median IEP actually looks like? And so that counterfactual on what is the level of quality is very present there. Paperwork, grading, a lot of basic communication and so forth. And so I think for teachers, this would be like having having a fantastic executive assistant. And I loved your word, could enliven. It could allow you to focus more on the aspects, the things that actually drew people to teaching in the first place. We're coming up on time. Couple of quick lightning round questions for you guys. We've sort of danced around this. I just want very direct. What do you think? Both of you, I'm just very curious. What is the big upside of AI that you think the critics are missing, and what's the big downside that you think the proponents are missing in terms of its applications in schools?
I mean, I'm happy to start on downsides. I really do think there are two, and we've touched on both of them. One is the cognitive offloading and the potential that AI could really harm learning. And I'm very worried about that.
Yeah.
The second is AI companions, and like really in the same way that you need some friction and some hard work to learn, you need friction and hard work in human relationships, and AI kind of takes that away in a way that I think is very dangerous for young people in particular, but honestly, all people. So those are the downsides. I think the upside is like really this personalization that is very real in terms of its potential. The other one that we haven't talked about that much is this idea of the efficiency gains and the fact that, yeah, there will be some job displacement for white collar workers. And I just like that is actually a good thing in the context of the education sector where we have declining enrollment. And we have to be able to say out loud that it's okay for some cost reduction to happen in these big districts that are, you know, losing enrollment. They have budget deficits that are ballooning, to your point that you make often, Jed. You know, Marguerite Rosa and Chad Alderman have great work on this topic. We've been hiring people like at a huge clip at the same time that students are leaving traditional public districts. And AI could be a great solution to streamline some of the administrative burdens, the back office, and basically increase the proportion of your resources dedicated to students at the same time that you decrease the overall amount of resources. That's a huge upside, and we have to start having the courage to like say it out loud and have this conversation directly.
Okay, what I'm taking away from that, the summary version is we shouldn't be running education like a jobs program, and Jed's AI girlfriend may not be everything he thinks she's cracked. Okay, Marisa, your turn.
I have two upsides, one of which is a lot more nascent than the others, and it is connected to your theme, Jed, around teachers. We know we have a chronic teacher shortage. And at the same time, AI is sort of raising the bar for what it means to be a teacher. I feel like there is a way that we can use AI to get more teachers to that higher level faster, such that we can actually really address some of this teacher shortage. And it's connected also to like how we think about school. I would actually push back. I think we have the time and the moment right now to make a choice about what we want school to look like. Do we want it to still be that central place of gathering? And what is the value of that? I would argue there is a lot of value in students coming together and learning from each other. You know, we saw during COVID, they actually really need that. And so maybe school becomes somewhere where the teachers can facilitate that more, and they are more skilled at facilitating that, right? Rather than lecturing or having students do worksheets or all of that. And so this is, like I said, a nascent thought. I don't know exactly what that path looks like, but I feel like it's there and it's something worth exploring.
Andy, I can't help it. Can I ask one last question before we?
Yeah, I was going to let you bring it home anyway. So go ahead.
A lot of this has been outside of charters. It was great that Dream was one of your example plays. I'd love to just make the connection to charters here. In 2011, I think CCSA had Saul Khan come and give our keynote at our annual conference. I got my time with Saul before. He said, "Is there anything I should know about my audience and any message you'd like me to share?" And I said to him, "Please share that if you guys don't use tools like this, at a rate faster than the traditional public school system, you will be relegated to the ash heap of history as fast as they will be." And he said, "Thanks, Jed. I'm not saying that." but what's interesting is back in 2011, there was the presumption that charter schools had the flexibility to do it if they wanted to. Now you say that same question to people, and people presume that charter schools are so regulated they can't, even if they want to. My question for you guys is, where do you think charter schools should be in this space? I'm, of course, going to be keeping to push the envelope, try as hard as you can, be the places that can evolve more quickly than others, even when you've got school districts and authorizers breathing down your throat. But maybe that's, it'd be a better message from somebody else, or maybe you have nuance to share. What is the charter school's role in terms of trying to make the AI evolution as successful as possible for all of public education?
We're currently working with about a dozen charters on their AI implementation strategies. And I think a couple things. I would say, number one, it's not too late to be getting started. I do think a lot of charters and a lot of districts are pretty far behind. But there's been like a lot of stuff that's been like stops and starts, and the tools are much better now. So starting now is not a bad time to start. And you are behind, but you can make up that time. So I would just encourage people to dive in, definitely with the premium subscriptions, so that you're getting the best tools that are available. And then I would say, yeah, let's have the charters be the ones that are leading the charge on not just like we're going to innovate and throw the spaghetti against the wall, but we're going to do it in the way that we know has always worked best for CharterFolk. We are going to do it with a huge amount of rigor, with a lot of attention to implementation, a lot of attention to detail, with full support for teachers, full support for students. And what we land on and scale within our schools, our networks, and our movement is excellent. It's not stuff that's going to enable students to offload or teachers to offload, but it's like we're going, like, I guess, as fast as we can and as slow as we must to achieve like real rigor and excellence. I think that is what charters can bring.
I would say that it's really about a mindset. You have to bring that sort of design thinking and curiosity mindset that really made charters stand out to begin with. And you have to find it again and bring it back. And I would assume that most charter folks are more primed to do so than in a traditional district. And so I would really encourage, like, as much as possible, let that curiosity run free, really within, safety guardrails, but try, prototype, evaluate, as Mary said, test it, refine it, try again. Like that prototyping mindset, that design thinking mindset, I think is critical right now, because you just have to keep experimenting, and that's where we're at.
Thank you so much for that, Andy. We got to get the posse together more often here.
Yeah, this was great. I mean, look, I have the privilege of working with these two, and I learned stuff on this. So this was fantastic. Mary, Marisa, thank you so much for your taking time out and joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Well, certainly, this is moving fast, so we'll certainly have you back before too long to do this again, just because the velocity really is something.
Thanks so much, folks. Learned a lot.
See you soon, Jed.
See you, Andy.
Bye.